want to start off with just a question of you all. When you hear, especially in light of what's been revealed these past several days, which is still ongoing and unfolding, when you hear the name National Security Agency, what comes to mind? Bad things.
The puzzle box.
Puzzle box?
Smoke and mirrors.
Smoke and mirrors.
No such agency.
Spying.
Spying?
It has that faint ring of safety, like, because I'm older. It's like
Faint ring of safety.
a suggestion that it's to make us safe, but I know otherwise.
Evil mathematicians.
Evil mathematicians.
The movie Enemy of the State.
Yeah, the great movie Enemies of the State.
Yeah, much closer to the truth than it turned. Yeah.
It was on last weekend too.
Anything else come to mind? National security? When you hear national
We
security,
have none.
but isn't that what the government's supposed to do, is provide for the common defense as one of the two key responsibilities under the Constitution, is provide for the common defense. There's also the general welfare clause. So I'm just playing devil's advocate here for a moment. So it's really critical to establish the context for NSA. I was inside that system for a number of years as both a contractor and then as a senior executive. But all kinds of things have been attributed to NSA. And because it's so secret, it's hard to sometimes know. And now you're getting information that's being revealed in the press that has opened up a significantly large window. And it's just a window of a much larger house, by the way. But a significantly large window, and when you see inside those dark rooms of that place called NSA, it's quite revealing. So I want to take you on a little bit of a trip here in terms of security. So here's the transition question. When you hear the word privacy, what comes to mind?
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality.
Well, of everything Jessica mentioned, what I really resent is that when I'm using my MTA card, that's also part of it, where I go, and also the easy passes. That's the one that I feel
These are
I
all-
should be able to move freely, and people shouldn't know
Move freely.
if I'm visiting family or, riding downtown.
Okay. What comes to mind? Anybody else? What comes to mind when you hear privacy? Is it
Brandeis.
Brandeis?
Invasion.
Invasion?
Dissent.
Dissent?
The right to break the law.
Right to break the law? Yeah.
Breathing space.
That's an interesting phrase, particularly in the context that you're the government in secret. Right? They give themselves license to break the law for your own good. Any other? Because I'm gonna really paint a really stark picture. Because I think part of all the hoopla and all these revelations and people having ringside seats, seeing, at least peering into part of the dark corners of NSA, I think we sometimes lose the context. We may possibly lose the context for what's really at stake here. Because NSA is an awesomely powerful, extraordinarily powerful institution of the United States government. And it came to being in the early years of the Cold War. You have to remember its history. And the original presidential directive that brought it into being in 1952 still remains mostly secret to this day. So, and here it is, 60 years later. And it's in the front page news, except the New York Times. So I'm going to create a little scenario for you. For a moment, just kind of parse through your entire life and every transaction you have ever made. Any record that exists on you, all your emails, your tweets, everything that Jessalyn mentioned, all of it. You know somebody that know somebody, but you don't know them. And with all that information, oh, by the way, all your passwords as well, and every single account. And you're going to give a total stranger in your own country complete access to that. You trust your fellow citizen, don't you? They're not going to do any harm. So you're going to give them everything there is to know about you. Would you do it?
Not willingly.
Why not? This is a critical question we have to answer for ourselves.
Nobody's business.
It's nobody's business.
It's none of their business.
None of their business.
I have rights under the Constitution.
You have rights under the Constitution. Wow. We're going to talk about rights under the Constitution in the context of what happened to me, because that's, by the way, that's what I had stood up to support and defend as an oath to an idea which included the people having rights that could not be taken away by the government. Okay? Why else would you be reluctant to give your entire life? We're talking everything, you know, all the papers, all your little secret things where you've got your account information that you might forget, or unless you've got like one password on your computer that, you know, keeps track of all that. Even that might be compromised.
Will you consent to it?
Consent. Interesting word, consent.
Power, it's a power.
Power?
Well, no one
I
asks.
think about manipulation.
Manipulation.
Yeah, some things are embarrassing.
Some things are embarrassing.
You won't act freely. You cannot act freely. if
You cannot act freely.
You're
That's a
being
good,
observed.
wow, this is great, because that's a critical
You're
component.
being observed, you can't act as you would.
Wow, being observed. Yeah, I'll talk about being observed. What it does to you, how it corrodes society. But a fellow citizen. So let's bring it a little bit closer. It's your next door neighbor. Going to do the same thing? You're going to give your next door neighbor all the same information.
There's also an inequality. They know, but we don't know. They know all about us, but we know nothing about them.
I think that's critical.
Yeah, do I get all their stuff?
Oh, so you get all their stuff.
The gentleman raised an interesting point, and with consent, like I give my neighbor things to watch my house while I'm gone. I give my kids passwords so that they can access information on my site. But I'm consenting to a sharing relationship. I'm not being observed, as you're saying. That's without my knowledge.
And when you get back, you take your keys back.
Yeah.
It's about the context, people taking things and misinterpreting and creating a totally different picture of who we are.
So why would you let the government have unfettered access to everything there is about you?
We never gave permission. We never gave permission for that. That's,
We never gave permission, but in the absence of permission, they're accessing all of this in increasing amounts of it, by the way, as revealed rather dramatically over the past several days. No news to me, by the way. I've had many people ask me, wow, Tom, no news at all. It's routine. It's routine. So if they have access to all that, what's the big deal if you have nothing to hide?
Well, can I say something? This is a good point, actually. And the thing, I think the proponents of this national security policy that, you know, this movement that's going on and to invade our privacy, I think if the government were righteous and we trusted them, then it would be okay, because proponents actually say that they're looking out for communications that send up red flags, a sort of data mining that indicates as a preemptive strike in order to keep us safe where the terrorists are, who's communicating with the enemies of the state.
They say that. That's the big meme. That's a big meme. They're rolling back out again.
I think it's a matter of
It's our
trust.
job to keep you safe. Is there anything in the Constitution that obligates the government to keep you safe? I can't find it anywhere.
And especially a government whose enemies of the state include us.
Ah,
With a government that's been fueled by greed and racism, who's the enemy?
you gotta remember,
Who are they going to observe? I know if you're black and brown, you've never been off the they're okay list. You've always been an enemy of the state. So anyone thinking they're doing it for our own good has lived in a little bit of an illusion for a minute.
Which dates back to Benjamin Franklin's warning.
so, you're me, You find out after 9/11, within the first few weeks after 9/11, that the United States government, in the deepest of secrecy, has decided that the Fourth Amendment no longer applies in terms of the restrictions the NSA had because of massive abuse during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and formal programs they had then to spy on people they didn't like in secret, when there was no FISA and there was just the Fourth Amendment. So after 9/11, they said, you know what? Threat's too big, it's secret. We're just going to bypass the Fourth Amendment, all the restrictions that we have in place, 23-year legal regime called Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and we're just going to sweep up what we need to, because we need to make Americans feel safe again. Now, you don't know this. You don't know this is going on. They're doing this ostensibly for your own good. They're doing this ostensibly for the purpose of national security. They're doing this ostensibly to protect the nation. You have to remember, they had failed to protect the nation on 9/11. They had failed. The event itself is a fundamental systemic failure of the system. I recognize there's all kinds of theories and everything else, but remember, I was on the inside, right? So, I discovered this, and I knew that I was eyewitness to the subversion of our own Constitution. And I knew that the choices the government made at the highest levels, the White House in partnership with the NSA, would have enormous strategic consequences down the road. Might not be visible initially, and all the fear and hysteria post 9/11. And of course, in October, the Patriot Act was passed. First enabling act legislation. To begin to make legal what had been fundamentally illegal in terms of violating our rights and freedoms. But hey, I was told we live in a different era. You don't understand, Tom. Yeah, we have a Constitution, but we got a real threat out there. That threat means that we've got to take that line and move it way over to the security side. If that means giving up a few liberties here and there, and hey, if you're an American and have nothing to hide, it's not going to matter. I gave everything I knew about that secret program to 2 9/11 congressional investigations in 2002. That history was censored, suppressed. It was never put even in the classified report. It was as if it had never happened. That's 2001 and 2002. And I continue to blow the whistle inside the government. Now accelerate forward to 2005, because this is, for me, a living echo of what's happening right now in terms of what we're now hearing about NSA's activities and conduct. So in 2005, December, Eric Lichtblau and James Risen, right? This is a rather extraordinary article, appeared on the front page of the New York Times, December of that year, revealing for the first time the existence of the so-called warrantless wiretapping program. And what they revealed was only the tip of the iceberg. But what they revealed was an actual violation of the Constitution and the statutes that govern that activity. And what did the government do at that time? This is a critical program. The revelation of it caused grave and severe damage to the security of the United States. It's going to enable our enemies, blah, 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 blah. Are you hearing more than just echoes from December 2005 with the government wheeling things out in front of CNN and all the other main broadcast stations about why, now that the programs have been partially revealed, they have to justify their continuing existence? And it was for our good. Right? It was for our good. But see, I've lived all this for the past 6 years, 7 years. Because in 2006, I came under investigation. I became a target of the surveillance state. I became a target of a massive multi-million-dollar, multi-year national security investigation, looking at who were the sources for the Risen and Lichtblau article. I was not a source, interesting enough, but I had made contact with another reporter from a different newspaper. That was a triggering event. And by virtue of association, the fact that as an American practicing my First Amendment rights, to reveal what was clearly in the public interest, the government was actually violating the public interest, I became a target. I don't know if anybody in this room has been the subject of of a target in the manner in which I was. And so over the course of almost a year and a half, not only was I electronic surveilled extensively, but I was physically surveilled. Do you know what it's like to have people following you around in the shadows? And then later on, they made it even more obvious because they clearly wanted to be extraordinarily intimidating. When I would leave my home in the morning, and I was teaching at the National Defense University, there used to be a couple cars parked down at the end of the road. Later on, the FBI, very chilling, said, oh yeah, we knew when you left in the morning, we knew when you got back, we knew everywhere you went, Mr. Drake. What does it do? Now, I'm living this as an individual because I'm now a target of a criminal investigation. What does that do to you? What do you think it does to you to have the government now considers you an enemy of the state, up to no good, that you are directly endangering national security, which in itself is just a euphemism. And you're getting in the way of our ability to operate in secret, ostensibly on behalf of the American people. What does it do to you? So let's accelerate forward to the last 3 or 4 days. Extraordinary revelations, no news to me. And I had never seen one of these, I'll be the first to tell you that. I was certainly aware of these orders, these special orders, now a rubber stamp from the secret FISA court, but reading that rather clinical, antiseptic language, pseudo-legalese, authorizing the government in the deepest of secrecy based on the classification of that order alone, authorizing, basically directing, as an authorization under National Security Authority, and you got a court saying, yep, it's approved. Blanket warrant for Eisen, turn over all your phone records, all of them. Every single phone record, and do so every day to NSA. I guess that'll keep the threat away. Every single phone number. There's no pretense of probable cause. There's no pretense of any kind of other investigation. There's no pretense that somehow in doing this, right, we'll stop the next attack. This is every single phone record. You know what they can do with metadata? Because they build this profile over time. Because I'm going to give you a very stark example. In terms of history, we forget history. This is why you have to chain the government down with all kinds of binders. And what's happening now is we have the government is unchaining itself from the very Constitution that it is supposed to uphold. But it's gotten in the way. It's gotten in the way. I used to fly on RC-135s during the latter part of the Cold War. And I flew under the authority of the military side of NSA called Central Security Service. I was a cryptolinguist. That RC-135 had extraordinary capability to vacuum the ether of anything, pretty much anything that was broadcast as a signal. We swept all that up and we reported back, as we called it, Big Daddy. I realized at the time that Big Daddy was going to become Big Brother. The target country in which I became an expert was East Germany. I would encourage everybody, get the chance, to read the history of East Germany. Because if there's a template for what's going on right now, it's East Germany. That was a fascist surveillance state. A fascist surveillance state. The Stasi, the secret police, had become monstrously efficient over the years in building these massive dossiers on all of their citizens. They didn't trust anybody. Anybody seen the movie Lives of Others? There's that scene where years later, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the Stasi records are released. And he's now in the unified Germany, and he's going through his records, and guess what? He finds out that his home had been wired, completely wired by the Stasi. And remember in that scene, he goes back to his old apartment, and he starts pulling the wires out of the walls. Take that, and now expand it to the entire United States electronic infrastructure. and every single company, and every single concern, and every single telecom, and every single internet service provider. Because guess what's been revealed in the last few days? And it's still just the tip of the iceberg, folks. A program called PRISM. Secret agreements with, how many have Google accounts, Gmail accounts in this room? Don't have to raise your hand. Or Yahoo, or Microsoft, Facebook. Secret agreements with the government has a direct pipeline in to the servers that are hosted by those same companies. What does that tell you? East Germany was a rather small company, a small country, about 16 and a half, 17 million people. You have this extraordinary, deep secret alliance between the federal government, the national security apparatus, and increasingly more and more companies that have data about you, social media data, all electronic data, records data, account information. The Stasi would be drooling if they had access to NSA technology. Because it makes it so much easier. You know what a pain it is to build all these paper records? Now it's electronic. And how much easier is it if I can make secret agreements with these companies and get pipeline access to all that information? Guess what that gives me the ability to do? Remember, and I haven't asked you the other question, by the way, because it's one of the phenomenal government memes, propaganda meme, right? Well, hey, it doesn't matter anyways, so even if we get caught doing this, if you have nothing to hide, what are you worried about? You don't get to choose. The government gets to choose. And I'm exhibit number 1 with what happens if they don't have the evidence, they make it up. If they don't have the evidence, they recast it in secret. And they place you in a box because they can. They can lie about even your own life. They can take transaction information and turn it into something else. They can say you made this phone call to associate with somebody else. Or, and especially if they don't like you, they're going to find something. That's why I asked you early on. They'll find something that is embarrassing, that you wouldn't want to have known to others, or just the fact that you made certain kinds of purchases or viewed certain Netflix movies. You know, when they came to my house on November 28th, 2007, which was, I would never want anybody to go through the experience I did. We were looking out your bedroom window and you see a dozen FBI agents, armed, streaming across your front yard, and there's this huge knock on the door, which they told me later if I hadn't answered the door within a few seconds, they were going to bust it down. In that moment, I was target number 1 for this massive investigation. And they went through my entire house over the next 9 years. They were even in the backyard with these poles looking for hidden compartments and boxes. They were in my library. And they were walking around looking at all the books and papers in my library. And one of the FBI agents said, "You have some very interesting material here, Mr. Drake, because if you actually took the titles, just the binder titles, the metadata titles alone, not the content of the books, just the binder, or the cover, title and author, just took that alone, well, if it goes across the entire political spectrum. I'm a student of politics and history, very interested in life on a number of different levels. They were having a hard time trying to figure me out. They were. But they had to put me in a box. They had to make me something I wasn't. But at a minimum, I was an enemy of the state. April 2008. I want to give Kevin an opportunity to give you an update on Manning, and we can open it up. It's just to give you a sense, because I've already lived what this means. And I have the dubious distinction as well as the personal burden that I continue to bear to this day, that under this unprecedented, this incredibly relentless assault on information, assault on truth-telling, assault on whistleblowing, the assault on the First Amendment and using the Fourth Amendment as the acid to erode the foundation of this country. I have the dubious distinction and burden of being the only one that's held them off. Because what the government can do to you is unbelievable. The pressure they put on you, trying to separate your family, divide your friends, cast aspersions, becomes an extraordinary lonely existence. They separate you from everything you ever were. April 2008, I was actually in New York City, trying to clear my head, realizing what I was facing 5 years ago. I got a call from the FBI agent when I was still cooperating. I was still cooperating because I was reporting high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution. We need to have you report to one of our facilities. So I did. The chief prosecutor, for the first time, was there and met me. And it was a star chamber. And he looked at me, sitting about 4 feet. He said, "Mr. Drake, how would you like to spend the rest of your life in prison unless you start cooperating with our investigation? Because we have enough information to put you away for a long, long time." I'm an American citizen. This is the chief prosecutor. But see, here's the kicker. That's 2008. All those threats, I was just simply under investigation. I had not actually been prosecuted. I was being persecuted, that's for sure. I was the target of a major investigation. This is the Bush administration. I wasn't prosecuted under the Bush administration. In fact, my private attorney figured, and other people in my life figured, I'd go back to normal. I'd actually be able to go back to the government. It would all end. Remember Obama's campaign words. And this was the eloquence he so expressed from a teleprompter about the value of whistleblowing. 4 years later, he was bragging about being the administration far more than any other all others combined, and going after the truth tellers and the whistleblowers and the leakers. So here we are. What's at stake? Because the national security state has become a leviathan. It is fully embedded within the very fabric of our society. If you care about your own future, if you care about freedom, if you care about those rights not being taken away from you and being turned into privileges, the government decides when and where they'll dispense them, then you better stand up and defend what this country is all about. You better stand up and not just be a spectator, not just listen, not just hear from me, having lived all this and others. You better take action, because they don't yield power willingly. Reparaphrasing, recasting Frederick Douglass's most powerful words from the 19th century. It's way past time, folks. And yet we were blowing the whistle years ago about this. And no one was really listening. But are you listening now? They won't yield. They have already opened up, as Jesla mentioned, a criminal investigation. Because they're exposed. They don't like being exposed. They don't want to be open and transparent. They want to hide in the shadows. If it means taking away your rights for the sake of their agenda, then so be it. Just remember history. I don't want history to repeat itself. And I'll leave you with this, and then we'll move to Kevin. I was in Europe recently. A lot more receptive audience overseas, by the way, with respect to this subject. In fact, right now journalists from any number of countries being incredibly persistent for interviews. They realize what's going on, and they're really, really worried. And they hear about these partnerships and arrangements between the U.S. and other countries. But this couple who lived in Germany put it in the starkest of terms. Well, at least we recognize, understand that we live in a post-fascist society. You live in a pre-fascist society and you don't even know it.